And welcome to all those who signed up for today's webinar in the digital storytelling unfolding the narrative. I would like to welcome all of our guest speakers who will be presenting for today's session. And I would also like to mention for all those who are streaming in while we wait, would you feel free to maybe mention where you're from in the chat?
Looks like we have lots of people joining from Ontario, a couple from BC. Welcome everyone. PI, Calgary, very exciting. People from Brantford. I grew up in Brantford, very exciting, super excited to see you here. Welcome everybody.
While we wait for the rest of the people, I think we could have a couple more to join us right now. Is it possible to play the video again for those who are just currently waiting and those who came after? Okay, so let's say hello, welcome once more to all those who signed up for today's webinar, Digital Storytelling Unfolding the Narrative. In an effort to find new ways of serving more underrepresented communities in collaboration with the National Trust for Canada and the New Paradigm New Tools program, we present to you the topic of digital storytelling as a means of celebrating Canada's diverse heritage places. Next slide, please. I would like to start this session by respectfully acknowledging that the place from which we are gathering virtually is known to us as Ottawa, the traditional unceded territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe people. We recognize that our webinar participants live and work on the lands and territories of many Indigenous peoples across Canada, and we encourage you to reflect on the shared human experience of storytelling as placemaking. It is through storytelling that we can learn from one another and create richer, more accurate stories of these places that are important to us. We know that Canada's history and heritage is complex and contentious, dominated by white-centered perspectives, and that our work and the system we are a part of needs to change. We believe that diversity means inclusion and reflection of all people, including cultures, languages, and perspectives. Next slide, please. So what does digital storytelling really mean? Digital storytelling makes use of new and existing technology to enhance a story or a space. It provides the opportunity to create passive or interactive experiences for the audience. Digital storytelling provides a particularly appealing approach for heritage sites, as it allows for the telling of numerous stories throughout time from other points of view. As there is a great degree of flexibility in creating digital stories for the audience, it plays an important role in determining which style of digital storytelling will be best suit the user's needs. Next slide.
Stories are really exciting because they sort of help people understand the world around them. So creating a digital story can kind of seem like a daunting task. So scholars have kind of worked to establish essential steps to effectively tell a story. And we've further boiled those down to sort of 4 phases. The first phase is the idea phase. This is when you're going to establish the who, what, when, where, and why of your project. And this is something we're going to elaborate on a little bit later. Second is the collection phase, where you establish what kind of materials you might need for your project. This can take all kinds of forms, but it might be archival photographs, new photographs, or drawings. The third phase is where you begin your combination of materials and your narrative to create a cohesive story. And the final phase is sharing your completed project. This phase is super exciting because it's a time to reflect on the process and your project. Digital storytelling allows for the possibility of continued development over time. So if we can go to the next slide. The majority of you are likely in the beginning phases of thinking about digital storytelling. So we wanted to sort of highlight some of the important questions to ask in this first phase. So some of the things you may want to think about are, what kind of story do I want to tell? From what perspective? If we can click to the next slide, I think there should be something else coming. Yeah, there we go. Perfect. What are my goals? So a lot of times creating a storyboard can kind of help you establish these goals and maintain them throughout the project. Who's my audience? This may affect how you want to tell your story. So for example, if you have a group of high school students versus scholars, your tone and delivery would be vastly different. And if we can go to the next slide. Just a couple more. Perfect, yeah. We also want to think about what kind of material we would want to collect. And this is largely dependent on what kind of tool we would want to use to tell our story. So a couple that you might want to consider is a virtual tour, interactive game or map, photography, photogrammetry, or animation. And we've compiled some tip sheets that will help you get a better understanding of what these options might be and how we might go about using those, which will be released at the end of this webinar. So in this webinar, we have invited 3 guest speakers from various departments at Carleton University to discuss the various ways that they've sort of approached digital storytelling in practice. So we'll kick things off with Kate Graham, who will tell you a little bit about her interest in the relationship between architecture and digital storytelling.
Okay, so I just need to share my screen, sorry. Okay, so you should hopefully see my screen now. So I just want to say thank you very much for having me here today. What I'm going to be talking to you about is projects that we've done at Carleton Immersive Media Studio, where I'm associate faculty, specifically ones to do with Parliament Hill. But to start, I'm going to tell you the story of Parliament Hill, and I accidentally advanced too fast. So Parliament Hill, before it was Parliament Hill, before Ottawa was Ottawa, it was Bytown. And the land of Parliament Hill was before known as Barracks Hill, and it was created in order to oversee the construction of the Rideau Canal and the locks. But then Ottawa became Ottawa, Bytown became Ottawa, and it became the capital city of the newly found Canada. And in it, new Parliament buildings were built on what used to be Barracks Hill, which is now Parliament Hill. And these are in a Gothic revival style. However, in 1916, the center block burnt down. There was someone who left a lit cigarette in one of the reading rooms, and the whole building was burnt to the ground, except for the Library of Parliament that luckily had steel doors that were closed and separated from the rest of the building. But a new building was rebuilt in the Gothic revival style, and with it came this new center attraction to the building, which was the Peace Tower, this long, big tower in front of the building. And that is the building that stands at Parliament Hill today, where people come and gather for celebrations, for protests, and to learn about the Canadian Parliament buildings and the Canadian parliamentary activities. And typically, people would be allowed to enter the building for guided tours where they learn about the activities within it, such as the House of Commons and the Senate of Canada. And you get to have these tours and learn about all of the government activities that happen within the buildings. But right now, the buildings are closed for a multi-year rehabilitation project. And this project has moved all of those government activities to other locations, and the building is being updated in order to meet current standards and continue to be the building where the government activities are housed. And so that is the story of Parliament Hill and the rehabilitation project, but told using 6 different projects that Carleton Immersive Media Studio has created. All of these projects are unique, but they all tell that same story. They all talk about it just in a different way using different technologies and mediums. To just quickly show what the different projects are, we have the documentation and the building information model of the parliamentary precinct and the Parliament Hill and the buildings. So this is done through photogrammetry and laser scanning, which is then converted into a building information model. Well, used, not converted, but building information model is used as a reference, using those as a reference. Next, we have Heritage Passages. This is an older project that was created in partnership with the Carleton Library and their archives and research collections, as well as the Bytown Museum and another research lab at Carleton called Hyperlab. And this is mainly a web project that shows that small time frame of when these locks were created by Bytown, and it has all of the buildings and a bunch of artifacts related to like the growth of the area at the time. Next, the Senate virtual tour, which uses 360 photos in order to bring you through the different Senate spaces. So you can go from step to step all the way through the Senate spaces of the Canadian Parliament buildings, as well as click on different elements to learn about the architecture, the artwork, and the furniture of the space. And then we have the VR kiosk, which was the short-lived project for Canada's 150th birthday that was directly across the street from Parliament Hill. And for that summer, people could walk up and experience one of 5 different VR 360 video stories that focused on the rehabilitation project. And we have Building Canada's Parliament, which is a prototype project that never ended up happening. But the idea was that every week for approximately 5 years, there would be a new story released that used interactive media and storytelling techniques to show different aspects of the rehabilitation project and the building and its history to really emphasize the importance of the construction work. And lastly, we have Parliament, a virtual experience. This is a VR experience that you can access now for free on Steam. And it was done in partnership with the Library of Parliament and the National Film Board. And Carleton Immersive Media Studio was brought on board to create the space. So we created the architecture and the space that the story happened on, and another creative team layered on top the story. And so all of these projects are the same. They tell the story of Parliament in different ways. And the reason why they're so different from each other is because they're different ways, they're different narratives of the same story. And to understand that, we need to understand the difference between story and narrative, where story is like an event that happens once. If we think about fact-based storytelling, it's the actual history, what's happened, and the narrative is the telling of it. And when we choose the medium, we can choose a medium that will tell that story very specifically to help. And well, I show this example of Wizard of Oz because I think it does a great job of showing why we need to think about the medium. And so The Wizard of Oz, this movie came out in 1939. And at the time, majority of movies were all black and white. So when you go to the theater, you were expecting a black and white movie. And that's how this movie started, all black and white, until Dorothy opens the door and sees all of the color and realizes she is not in Kansas anymore. And this movie is so successful at that because it used color as one of its main storytelling methods. The book wouldn't have done this because that's not the way, like, it's, even if it talks about color, it's not going to do it in the same way because it's not as magical just to read about it as the wow factor. And so this movie both uses color, which is a visual style, to its advantage, but uses the fact of when it came out and the fact it wasn't expected to its advantage too for storytelling. So when we're creating stories, or narratives of them, what we're trying to say, we need to think about why we're choosing a specific type of medium and how we should use it to our advantage. So if you're creating a video, for example, you're choosing the order and the length of different clips and how they connect to each other, which will be different than if you're creating an interactive media that you might have less control of how the order that people will experience things in. So if we look at these projects again, we can see how each one used their medium specifically for what they were trying to convey. For the point cloud for the documentation and the building information model, it was all about kind of scale and detail and embedded information. So when we get to a larger size, it's showing things at, in less detail, but it has that large scale. But when we get closer, when we get zoomed in, we can have areas that have intense amounts of detail to really emphasize their importance. So spaces like the Library of Parliament have a high level of detail in the modeling in order to show how important those components are to the overall building. Heritage Passages, which is, I forget the exact year, but it's a very, like, it's before we worked on the other Parliament projects. But this project used web, it was about web exploring on there. And the way that it did it was a lot through trying to express the history through the visualization style. So it used that idea of like the watercolor paintings that showed Bytown before as the rendering style for the models that were created for it. And it was all about going back in time and exploring these different areas. Senate tour exploration maybe is the key word that I should use to say this, because as the creators, we had no control over how someone was going to experience this, because there's like 100 or more different hotspots that you can click on, and multiple different paths that you can take. So you're never going to experience the whole thing. So the whole point of it was to create enough content there that everyone's experience when they go through was different and plentiful, and they would come out learning something about the Senate. And the VR kiosk, a little different. We had much more control because we needed that control to help move people through. And there were these 5 different experiences that you could choose from, that you just pick off of a menu. And then it just was a passive 360 experience that unfolded around you. Each was unique, but if someone had the time, if there wasn't a lineup, they could experience all 5, and they all added more. They layered on top to that idea of why the rehabilitation project was important. And it would be from emphasizing parts of the building that are really interesting, as well as showing the relocation of the spaces of how they're moving apart. And building Canada's Parliament, it was, in order to bring people back every week, we needed to keep it interesting. And I mean, everyone likes to click things. That was one of the ideas. We're focusing on different interactive content that would allow you to not just read or watch about what the information is, but play with it. So mini games or other interactive methods were something we're incorporating. And the last project is Parliament, a virtual experience. And so this one's all about immersion. It's about bringing you there. The building is now closed to the public. This is kind of the replacement for that. So you can put on the headset and enter the building, and there's the space that surrounds you, and in itself that's great, but then layered on top is these bright magical like lights and colors, and the sounds just bring you into the period of time that you're there and experience what's happening. So and here's just another example of that. So when you can see all of these, they all have a different way of showing it. They all have a different way of expressing that narrative or the story of Parliament Hill, the rehabilitation project, and over time. But they do it differently with each medium. So when you're picking any kind of medium and trying to figure out what narrative to do, you need to think about why you're doing it and what the purpose is. As the last slide, and I love ending on this slide because I think it really emphasizes my point. This is a model image from the Parliament virtual experience, and it's of the Library of Parliament looking down at the floor. And this is a view that you will never get in reality because one, you can't actually get to that point, or at least I never can. And the floor is covered by a carpet. So you will never see the floor in its entirety. And this is the importance of digital storytelling, is you're not just trying to replicate or replace something, you're trying to add more and give more to it and use the medium to your advantage. So that brings me to the end. So thank you very much. Looking forward to hearing the rest and for comments and questions afterwards.
Thank you so much, Kate. No matter how many times I see the Parliament building, it always wows me. So next we'll hear from Peter Kaufman, who will discuss how various media has come to play an important role in his work, particularly in the last couple years.
Thank you very much, Alex, and thank you for organizing this, and thank you everyone for being here. I decided to embrace the digital storytelling idea thoroughly by turning my talk into a short and very, very simple video, which just covers in broad strokes how I've been approaching digital storytelling in my work for quite a few years now. So I'm going to turn my live self off and share my screen, and hopefully this will work. Hi, and thanks for tuning in. Since you're watching this, I'm going to assume that you, like me, have heard the phrase digital storytelling a lot in the last 2 years. In my case, it's because my classroom changed literally overnight from something like this to this. All of a sudden, we all had to learn how to be digital storytellers, because the only way we could reach our audiences was digitally. That's been a real crucible, but one of the lessons for me is that digital storytelling has some real strengths and will continue to be part of my repertoire long after it no longer has to be. What I want to do in the next few minutes is share in very broad strokes some of what I learned about digital storytelling in these past 2 years. As luck would have it, I also trained and worked as a photographer and audiovisual producer before I went into academia, so I bring that with me too. But what I do for the classroom isn't very high tech. I don't have or use and can't afford equipment that would be out of reach for, say, a historic site. I want to start with a very basic question. What is digital storytelling? It sounds suspiciously like a buzzword, the kind of thing you're going to have to include in every grant proposal until the next buzzword comes along. But really, it's just a new way of delivering stories that we've been telling for a long time, and a new way of combining the methods we use to tell those stories. It can, of course, get very high-tech and complicated, but the fundamental elements are actually pretty familiar. Storytelling is storytelling. The digital bit simply gives us more tools and more options in how we combine those elements. First, there's text. If we're telling a story on screen, we can put text right in front of our audience, as I am now. Too much text is not a good thing, but as an organizing device, text is very useful. Then there's images. There's no limit to how many images we can show people either, so it's a very powerful tool for showing them things they can't otherwise see, or to make certain ideas easier to understand. Then there's audio. I'm obviously relying on that a lot right now, but audio can also include sound effects or music. Or other voices. It's an incredibly powerful tool for storytelling. Sometimes you don't need text or images at all. And then there's video, which is moving images, often with sound as well. This is the hardest thing to produce really well, so you have to think carefully about when and whether you actually need it. So how do you decide which of these storytelling tools to use and how to combine them? There are a few questions you need to consider. First, what is your story about? Every place comes with a huge number of stories embedded into it, and you have to make some choices. For example, if you're a historic site, or the Chateau Laurier, you might want to tell the story about the grand chateau-style architecture and its place in history. Or you might want to tell the story of the Grand Trunk Railway president who was the driving force behind the building, but who died on the Titanic before he could see it open. You could talk about the famous guests and tenants who stayed there. Or you could bring it into the present day and tell the story of the controversial proposal to put an addition onto the building. And it's not an either-or. You can tell all of these stories. One of the great things about digital storytelling is that you can have several delivery streams and let the audience choose which one they want to follow. The next question is, who are the storytellers? Is it a single narrator, like the one you're hearing now? Who else could tell your story? Who are the interested parties, the experts, the agents, the stakeholders? Again, thanks to the digital platform, you don't have to choose one at the expense of the others. Everyone can be at your audience's fingertips all the time. I want to give you an example of this by playing a clip from an audio program I did years ago for an exhibition of official war paintings at the Art Gallery of Ontario called Canvas of War. My goal was to evoke the experience of war for the audience. And because war is something that affects a lot of people, not just soldiers, I wanted to use voices other than soldiers' voices. Here are a few of the people I interviewed, introducing themselves.
My name is Alex Colville. I served in the Army altogether for almost exactly 4 years. The first 2 were simply as a soldier. The last 2, I was a war artist.
My name is Paquita de Diego. I was 12 years old when the Spanish Civil War started.
Andrew Choi is my name. When the war, Korean War in 1950, I think I was at 16, 17 at the time.
My name is Ron Pickler, and during the war I was a pilot with the RAF. So at that time I must have been 23.
My name is Bernhard Hengst, and I lived during the war in Germany, in Aussig.
Well, my name is Anne O'Brien, and at age 18 I joined the Navy, the Women's Royal Canadian Naval Service, known as the RANS.
My name is Irene Schröer. Some part of the war years I lived in Berlin, and later on I lived in central Germany on a farm.
That's one of the great opportunities that digital storytelling gives us, the chance to include multiple voices and to make all of them available all the time. Next, you need to ask who and where is your audience. Are they specialists in the field? Are they adults? Are they children? Is English their first language? Do they share your cultural assumptions and experiences? Or do these assumptions need to be explained? And where are they? Are they on site in your historic place? This is the historic site at Kingsmere, Mackenzie King Estate near Ottawa. As you can see, it gives us plenty to look at, so shoving a bunch of images and videos in front of visitors would be a bad idea. A freestanding audio program could be a much better plan. On the other hand, if your audience is at home, sitting at their computer, then the screen is the only access they have. So you need to give them plenty to look at, and you need to use visuals to tell your stories, not just as pretty backdrops for words. You need to show as well as tell. That can mean visualizing ideas and concepts, as well as showing places and things. Here's an example from one of my courses. Explaining in words the Vitruvian principle of the square module and how it was used to determine the elevation of ancient temple facades can be really tedious and really hard to follow, but showing how it works is much easier. And that, in turn, makes classical notions of harmony and proportion much easier to grasp. Visual communication is a fantastically powerful tool, and the computer screen gives us a lot of opportunities to use it. Once you've nailed down your stories and your audience, you need to consider what the elements of your story could be. A historic site offers a lot of possibilities here, including your physical space, artifacts, personalities, historical documents, written stories, oral history, historic events, rituals and/or practices that took place in your location. The list is endless. Your challenge is to choose the elements that will tell the most compelling story, and to think carefully about what those elements look and sound like. It's hard work, but that's where things get really fun and creative. I just have time for a couple of closing thoughts. Remember to keep the stories clear and uncluttered. Use multiple stories and voices if possible. Use multimedia. Remember that text, image, sound, and video are all at your fingertips and all have unique strengths. Tempting as it is, don't overreach. If you don't have the budget and crew for a video, try using just audio. And remember, your historic site is the star of the show. All these bells and whistles are there to give your audience a better experience and understanding of the place you're showing them. So good luck! This is Peter Kaufman, signing off from my digital storytelling headquarters, also known as the attic floor of my house. Thanks for watching. And there we go. Thank you.
That was great. Thank you so much. So lastly, Gonzalo Munoz Vera will finish us off with a discussion on modern applications of virtual and augmented reality.
Thank you everyone for this invitation. I'm going to just share my screen now. I think that's, can you see it? All right, so my presentation is part of my PhD research that I'm concluding this year, and it's, I think, a step backwards from what we have seen today. And actually, it's titled "The Proto-Virtual Reality of Panoramas: Representational Traditions from Earth to Mars." And I titled this presentation like this because I really want to talk about the analog side of the digital storytelling and how we got from there, from the past to practices that we are producing nowadays. So I was just scrolling through the Instagram NASA Instagram account in 2019, and I came across with this caption from this picture actually, and that it was mentioning this selfie produced by a robot, and it consisted of 57 individual images that were stitched together into a panorama. So when I was researching about this PhD topic about 19th century panoramas, I just was transported immediately towards what we're having nowadays. And I was transported from London 19th century towards the Mars at that very moment in 2019. So I was captivated by this idea of panoramas that are still existing, but of course through different media, through different means and different producers. And this is literally something that something not new at all. I mean, we have been seeing representational practices of places from ancient times. One of them is the well-known Catalhuyuk wall painting that represents a settlement around a volcano, using wall painting. So it's a very old tradition that we have seen that is still validated nowadays. We have also the cases as the Villa di Misteri in Pompeii, or the frescoes in Pompeii in general, that also recreated what we were seeing in societies by this time, using again these wall surfaces, but also trying to get rid of these partitions, these solid partitions that were constraining these spaces. So it's a very old tradition. That's what I really want to emphasize here. But it was not until the end of the 18th century when the Scottish painter Robert Barker patented the idea of the panorama itself, in which you can actually come and see different places from a single building. He came to this idea when he climbed to the Calton Hill in Edinburgh, and he had the idea to represent these 360 degrees in one frameless, huge canvas. And for this purpose, he had to come up with an idea of a space, of a venue in which to hang this humongous canvas. And that's how the first panorama rotonda ever was built, and involved Robert Mitchell as the architect by that time. And as you can see, this building is composed by corridors, staircases that are taking you to a viewing platform that is located specifically by a specific distance through the canvas in order to have this immersive experience in front of the view that was shown at the time. Exhibitions were changed every year. So you could see Rome, you could see Rio de Janeiro, Mexico, Edinburgh, and many other cities every year. They were changing every year. And in this case, this building also allowed for having two different views, two different cities, two different places in one single building, in one single city, in this case, London, at the beginning of the 19th century. So the panorama production by then involved a panoramist that was dispatched to a specific place, a specific location, especially abroad or foreign places, in order to survey this place, to portray this place for a specific viewpoint, from a specific landmarks that represented the best of those cities or those places. And then came back to a workshop and produced, put all this together, all the sketches together, and of course with a huge team of painters, and reproduce this view in full color and inside this building that we just saw. This is a very well express way of sending these panoramists out and bringing the images to home. That was shown in the Punch in 1849. Panoramas also, when you arrive at this venue, you had the chance to purchase a little booklet that also guided you in order to understand what you were seeing at that time. These booklets were very affordable, and so you can actually not just have a visual idea of the city in which you were surrounded, but also having an understanding of the history of the city, told, of course, by one single person, in this case, the owner of the panorama. So you have a narrative description of the city, a story behind the city told by this owner, but also a visual idea of the city. You could also have in these booklets these two miniatures, panoramas, in which you can actually locate yourself or identify particular landmarks within the view, and that were of course selected by this panoramist. These actually are the only extant visual documents of the panoramas that were shown by the 19th century. The panoramas don't exist anymore. This is the only visual document that we have. So you can actually use this as an archaeological tool, especially if you compare these with the current images like those that you can find in Google Images, for instance. So you can find the differences from before photography, actually, when the panoramas were produced, before cinema, of course, until what we have nowadays in these platforms, virtual platforms are very accessible. Panoramas were very popular throughout the whole 19th century because of cinema and photography. Of course, panoramas decline in popularity. However, there's been like a revival nowadays with these venues. and many of them are being restored. One of them is the cyclorama of Gettysburg in the US. Also, the one in Quebec is being recently restored. So they're still, they struggle through the 20th century, but they have been somehow having this revival nowadays. And of course, they are incorporating new technologies, digital images, of course. The panoramas that we saw in this cartoon is really something from the 19th century. Now you just need to take your digital camera and you can portray the city. In this case, yeah, and also the venues, as you can see, you can just locate these panoramas in different spaces available for these these images to be hung. This one is from New York, the Shanghai Panorama in 2013. But also panoramas evolve, and they incorporated fully digital means, like the case of the Panorama XXL in France, in which you can actually, they kept the cylindrical shape of this building, the rotundas, and they kept also the viewing platform at the middle in which people are located. But they changed, of course, the means of production. In this case, it's a digital image. Is either a projection on screens or a very high quality printing. And for many other purposes as well, for academic purposes, this cylindrical shape, this panoramic idea that was invented at the very end of the 18th century is being still used by many different entities. This one is Cave 2 from University of Illinois at Chicago, in which you can also navigate places that are not accessible anymore or are very hard to get into these places. So it's a tool that is being used for different purposes, not just for entertainment, as we saw in the panoramas. But yeah, what captivated my mind when I saw these Instagram images, it was that, yeah, the panoramas are still active, but now, yeah, using different means, different formats, and different producers. I mean, the main actor is a totally different being. It's not just a human being anymore. As we can see, this is the panoramas nowadays, which is doing something that was done before by a human being panoramist. And these are the results. We are still having panoramic images. I mean, we can still access to these images through the NASA website, but they're still using the same procedure of stitching together images into one single panorama. And of course, the results and the qualities are different, but they're trying to replicate what had been done by panoramists in the past. And also, they're trying to use an eye-level view in order to replicate a view that was, I mean, as being produced by a human being. And just to conclude, I would like just to show this little summary of the panorama production throughout the history of these representational traditions, in which travel was something quite important in the past. Traveling, the panoramist in the past involved traveling towards the particular space, involved sketching, surveying on site, then travel back to the workshop of the venue, and then a panorama production itself, which in total took around 2 years at least. And of course, involved a building, a space, a venue with huge magnitudes. What we're seeing nowadays with the current panorama production is it still involves traveling, it involves photography or video, but still involves traveling back. And the panorama production, of course, is quicker. You just project images or print them. The team of painters is not needed anymore. What we are seeing now with the panorama production is a different kind of traveling. It's space traveling, interplanetary traveling. We're not having a human being anymore. We're relying on rovers, and we're using digital means for the surveying or sketching. And the images, or whoever is producing these images, is not traveling back anymore. In the case of Mars, the images are traveling back via data transfer. And the panorama production involves a different architecture nowadays. I mean, it could be VR goggles or screens on your laptops or computers. But the idea of the panorama, of telling the stories of remote places, is still there. It's still having some sort of similar idea, similar purposes. So that's it. I hope this have been of use for the purpose of this webinar, and thank you for the invitation as well.
Thank you so much for those interesting ideas on panoramas. That was super cool. So Sonia Krutwagen, the Manager of Marketing and Digital Strategies at the National Trust, will just provide some closing comments and let us know some of the things that are coming up at the National Trust.
Oh, I wanted to say thank you to all the presenters. We're actually at the Q&A session. So while I talk, if you want to log your questions in the Q&A window, then we can get started. I wanted to tell you a little bit about the National Trust. So we are a national charity that empowers communities to save and renew heritage places that tell the stories of Canada and provide a suite of programs and offerings for heritage professionals, including our annual conference, webinars, coaching grants, and regeneration works. One of our programs that's coming up soon is Historic Places Days. And it's in brief a national event launched on the weekend after the Canada Day weekend, and it's designed to shine a spotlight on historic places from coast to coast to coast. The tagline for the event is "Every Place a Story," because that's how our historic places can be brought alive to visitors, as you saw in the webinar today. Historic Places is really a platform. It's an opportunity to gain profile and find visitors. It exists as much online in social media as it does in person on the ground. On this slide, you can see the dates for this year's Historic Places Day and some of the partners who have participated in the past. Thank you very much. The hashtag for the event is Historic Places Days. It runs for the month of July, starting July 8th. And last year we reached 2 million people, and there were 550 historic places that partook in the event. The last slide I want to share with you, or two more slides, is that the National Trust is a charity, and please consider becoming a member of the Trust. Here are some of the benefits of membership: the magazine Locale. You get discounts at our conference. We have a new product that's a year of learning, which is a library of online webinars, just like this one for our members. You can access 1,000 heritage places around the world for free, including 100 places here in Canada. And as a thank you for participating in today's webinar, please use the code new member to get a 30% discount when you become a new member of the Trust. And recently we have lowered our student membership rate to just $10. Last slide before we get to questions is about Regeneration Works. It's a treasure trove of learning opportunities, tip sheets, case studies, and more. You can find them all on our Regeneration Works website. The address is there. And now we've reached the end of our webinar, and we'll open the floor for questions.
Looks like we've got lots of questions already coming in. A couple of those which have already been answered in the chat pertaining to where to find the online link for some of the storytelling projects. So Kate has already put those in the chat. So thank you so much for doing that. And you can sort of reference those there. It looks like there was a question about Steam, if this was where the Parliament virtual experience is hosted, if you could speak to that.
Yes, so you can access the project on Steam. Now it was created for the Oculus Rift, and last I checked, it wasn't updated for the Oculus Quest, but maybe it's accessible on Oculus Quest 2. So if you have an Oculus Rift, unfortunately, this is one of the problems with technology. Technology changes so quickly. You make something and then a new headset comes out, and then it might not be compatible. But I also added the links for the Library of Parliament page and the NFB page on the Parliament project, because they have additional 360 videos that you can access on your computer or any headset.
That's great. And someone was also asking about the budget for this type of video. I'm not sure if you know much about that.
And of course, budget's never something we can fully always talk about, but all of the various Parliament projects, they were part of larger projects. So some of them are quite large. For example, Parliament, a virtual experience, we had I can't remember how many months, but it was less than a year that we worked on the model, but it was converting it from the building information model. And there was like 4 to 8 people at a time working on it. So it's quite an extensive project. I know there's better workflows now because things improve, but those projects are large. There are smaller scale projects that are much more accessible or ways of doing things to always consider. And the main thing is thinking actually exactly what Peter Kaufman was talking about, but like thinking about what you have at your disposal and not shooting for the moon when you don't have the budget for it.
That's great, thank you. So I just want to confirm with Sonia, the recording is going to exist on Regeneration Works website?
It's going to actually, it's on the National Trust website because it's a library. The library is on our corporate website. So nationaltrustcanada.ca. And sorry, the tip sheets that we're making are on the Regeneration Works website, just to make it complicated. So it's in both.
So there's lots available for you there. Some in the question and answer section as well. So Melissa Brady, she was asking, is digital storytelling an effective method for portraying things that aren't physical? For example, intangible elements such as communities and traditions, the experiential qualities of a space. Would any of our panelists like to answer?
I could take a stab at that. Yes, actually, I think it is. And especially because one of the things I emphasized in my presentation was audio. And in audio, you can use a sound, or rather you can use sound to evoke people. Yeah, first of all, you can use actual people's voices talking about personal experiences. You can use sound effects, you can use music, and you can create a whole sort of oral drama that will enable people in their imaginations to connect the dots between certain types of activities and this, if you're in a historic site, the space that they're in, where perhaps those activities no longer take place. So I think, yes, digital media can be fantastically effective at evoking rituals, practices, performances, and so on that are ephemeral and no longer there. But I think you can dramatize those orally and allow people the imaginative space between what they're hearing and the place where they're standing to have a really quite vivid experience.
That's great. Anyone else have any comments on it?
I'll just add, I agree with everything said there. When we're thinking about like those elements that you can't actually see, it's always a question of how do you do it, and exactly like more engagement in different things like the sound and images, and it's about evoking emotions at that point or retelling other people's. So it's just thinking about how to convey that. And one of the nice things is having like layers of information to discover and hear like that way. So that's something else to think of.
Right. We have another one from Melanie Frank. Frank. Okay, so they say they're from a local senior center and they're doing an event interviewing local seniors on video and local history. They're calling it story catching. They were wondering if there are any suggestions regarding how to go about this. I am assuming they want to put a video on the storyboard at a fall fair, so members of the public can click on a related mural to get individual stories. So I think they're just asking if there are any one of you here that can maybe offer any advice on what they can do or how they can do it.
I'm trying to wrap my head around exactly. So it's like a 360 mural that you want to have clickable hotspots on it. Is that what that means?
Seems so. If Melanie can perhaps confirm.
Okay. I'll assume it's that, and I can give a few suggestions. If you do something like, if it is about 360 photographies, it's a large board painted mural. So is it a physical mural or is it a digital, like on the computer? It's physical? Okay. Then you're looking at augmented reality. If you wanted to have it, so then you can overlay information. And then there's different mobile augmented reality apps that you can do. I'm not as familiar with current AR apps to recommend any. So I'll hold off on that, but there's tons of available that are easy to use that use location-based, not location-based, like icons, representations that you can have.
If I could just add something to that, at the risk of sounding like a broken record, I always tend to push back against the sort of default assumption that, oh, we're using digital stuff, so we got to have video. And looking at the other end of it, not so much the presentation end of it, but the production end of it, interviewing seniors, using video, you could do it that way, but A, good looking, good sounding video is more difficult to produce than simply clean sounding audio. And B, sticking a microphone in front of someone who isn't accustomed to speaking in that way is intimidating enough. Sticking a microphone and a camera in front of them can be much, much more intimidating. So it could be a much more gentle way of using your interview subjects, of getting them to open up and relax if you just use audio. And there's so many other possibilities for visual components that I would encourage you to just consider that option at least.
We did actually include in our tip sheet collection tips on how to record oral history, so that might be a good resource for you as well.
There are also some on how to capture a 360 image. So if your mural can wrap around that wall, maybe that's also good for you to perhaps overlay the two to get that, I guess, that augmented reality effect you wanted.
We also have a question about free or low-cost tools that you can recommend for interactive digital storytelling. Not a designer, but looking for tools that can be used to learn and produce web-based storytelling.
In the courses I teach, we use a lot of different technology that becomes really accessible and not necessarily for people who know how to code, and of course ones that are free or have at least a student version for free. And one thing that I quite like using is a program called Genially. It has its faults, I will say that, like there are problems with it, but it's free. There's a paid version as well, which I use the paid, but I get the students to use the free one. And it allows you to make a lot of interactive content, and even some things that about dragging, like you can drag objects around. It definitely has limitations, but it's something that I have seen on at least one professional website that people used. But also if you're just creating quick content, even things just like, I hate to recommend it, but Canva can be helpful for people creating quick content for that people can interact with in some ways. And then for 360 content, there's Momentum. I think that's what it's called, 360 Momentum. You can just do viewing for free, but if you pay for it, you can make tours and things like that.
That's fantastic. Yeah, and our tip sheets might be a good resource for you as well. We've included a lot of free or low-cost alternatives and how to use some of those things. So we do have the link in the chat, but I'll post it in there again, so you're able to go and reference those things. It looks like we have one more question. Dioramas look like they might be an excellent way to document and promote awareness of historic cultural landscapes. Are there examples of them being used for this purpose?
I know that the Google Arts and Culture has a series on like 360 tours, experiences on different national historic sites. So that might be it. But if anyone has more information, that might be of interest too. That may not be dioramas, but might answer part of it.
Yeah, it looks like in the chat, Emma Lang mentioned the Manhattan Project in New York that had a digital and physical diorama display. So that might be something to refer to. Thank you so much, Emma, for suggesting that. Okay, perfect. It looks like they're going to put a link in the chat.
Sophie Leon has also mentioned that In the same vein as using non-visual mediums to host interactive heritage experiences, is there a place for content created on programs like Twine and Inkle's Ink program? I can't say I'm familiar with these programs. I don't know if any of our panelists are.
I know what Twine is. Correct me if I'm wrong, but Twine, you could just embed the story into any website, correct? I think so. Most programs that you can create online content has a way of being embedded into an HTML website, and that is by far the best way of bringing things in my experience. Sometimes they allow you to host it directly there to have a link to it. It's just a matter of the problem with a lot is it formatted for mobile or just desktop? And a lot of them, like generally the one I mentioned, it really only looks good on desktop. But Twine, and Twine's a great idea for digital storytelling because it allows you to branch off to different narratives and choose your own adventure style. But you should just be able to embed it into a website with HTML.
Amazing. Thank you so much. Perfect. I think those are all the questions that we had. So I just wanted to thank everybody for joining us today, and thank you to our panelists for your presentations and assistance in helping us to answer all of these questions. We have included our emails here, so if you have any follow-up questions after the webinar is over, you can send an email to any of our panelists or to Kiara and myself, and we'd be happy to kind of answer those for you.
I think.
Go ahead.
Which then I think that kind of concludes